it seems common nowadays to look back at history and look at the people and the way they behaved and the way they acted and say, oh, these were bad people. The people of the past were bad. They were doing bad things. They were all bad. They were all evil. It seems like this has become a fair way, or like an accepted way of viewing history. And I just find it ridiculous. And I find it quite disgusting, to be honest, to have this perception of history, to have this perception of people in the past, that they were bad people, that they were not good, and that if you were placed back in history, you would be a good and holy person and not do all the bad things that all the people of the past seem to do, according to your perception. Now, I think this is just a ridiculous claim, but it seems to be such a strong feeling among maybe mainstream, culture and ideology nowadays. And I really just want to kind of take apart that argument or that way of thinking so that you can actually, move into your life with a better way of viewing the world and a more accurate way of viewing the world. So what happens is people look at history and they look at the way people act and they look at the things that were acceptable within a culture and they say, oh, that is so bad. These are bad people. And they say this from a statement of objectivity, according to themselves, right? They say, well, the things I deem to be good and the things I deem to be bad are objectively good and objectively bad. And so when I look at history and I see people acting what is, according to me, objectively bad, then I can claim that they were objectively bad people. Now, obviously, this is false, but it seems that many people believe this. What you're actually claiming, right, is that your subjective good and your subjective bad does not align with the subjective good and subjective bad of the past. And this is fair, right? This is what is happening. What is happening is that you have a different perception of what is good and what is bad than people of the past did. Now, what is very important to understand here is that when you believe to be acting in a right way, when you believe that you are a good person, you're acting in the right way, right? You act in a way that is quote unquote good and, at least try to minimize the quote unquote bad behavior that you have. You have to understand that this has been the case throughout all of history. All humans act for the most part in a good way, in a right way, according to their current morality, right? That is the key thing here, is that you are not any more right than most people throughout all of history. Of course, there are extremes, right? There are personality types that act in ways that are, let's say, outside the bounds of what is deemed to be morally good. You can say that maybe they, have some personality trait that allows them to enjoy the transgression of morally bad actions according to the dominant morality. But then you can argue that their internal morality is a bit different than what is accepted in the group. And I will get more into the group versus individual morality later, but the point being that you believe you act in the right way, and so did the people of the past. And so, if some higher authority were to judge who was the most right, you probably wouldn't be any better than the people who colonized continents or had slaves or whatever other thing you might look back at the past and deem to be exceptionally bad, right? I'm not saying this in a way to I'm not making any claims right now about which moralities are better or worse. We'll get to that later. But in terms of, are you as an individual acting in a right way? Most people throughout all of history act in just the right way. People are good. Inherently, people are kind of conforming to what is accepted, right? Otherwise, civilization would collapse. Otherwise, you would never be able to scale up to the degree that we have now, right? You wouldn't be able to have a complex society if people do not conform to a large degree to the accepted morality and the accepted rules of the culture that you live within. And so it's very important to understand this, right? You have to understand that what happens here is that you're judging the past through your moral filter, and your moral filter is different than that of the past. Now, your moral filter is not necessarily more right than those of the past. And that is where it's very important we'll talk more about, what is the right moral filter here, but you have to understand that the moral lens through which you view the world and people's actions and human behaviors, that moral lens has been created, and it is not necessarily objectively good or objectively best, right? So in order to even, I think, understand the following conversation here, you have to be willing to accept that across time, across history, across cultures, there has existed many different moralities. And to make a simple model for it, you can view morality as the basic rules of what is good and bad. We won't delve into, all the philosophical complexities of good and bad, or good and evil, or these elements. But for now, just think of, different cultures throughout history have different filters which they view the world through that determines whether actions and behaviors are good or bad. And they are very different across time. And history is proof of this, right? What was acceptable in different times, or what is acceptable in different cultures, is different from what is acceptable now, or what is acceptable in your culture. And also what is looked down upon, what is shamed, what is unacceptable, is different throughout cultures and throughout history. And so that is the reality of humanity, right? The reality of humanity is that morality is fluctuating, it is changing, and it can exist in many different forms. And the current morality dominating your worldview, dominating your perception of humans, of behavior, is just an instance of that, right? It is just one among thousands of moralities that have existed for humanity. So then, what we move on to try to comprehend here in a deeper sense is, well, okay, many different moralities can exist, and they have existed. What is the right way for you to live? What is the right way for you to view the world through? The filter in which you view the world and view humans through. I'm not going to claim to have the answer to everything, but I do want to start pulling apart the modern Western ideology, the modern Western morality. And there are many people and many philosophers who have done this. So, there is a lot to read on the topic, and I can't get into all the complexities of it, but I do feel it's worth sharing, and I'll try to share it in a way that is very understandable. So the goal, in essence, right, is that you have this morality that is dominating your worldview. It dominates your perception. It is so fundamental, so inherent in your being, in your identity, that it is very difficult to accept that these are rules that were created and were fed to you, and they don't exist objectively in the universe as a truth, right? That is not what they are. And you have to battle with yourself. You have to be willing to step outside the bounds of your morality to even comprehend the different, moralities that can exist, and see that they can also be right. They can also be correct. And to try to accept that your morality is not the best or the most good or the most right, that is challenging, and it demands that you challenge your inner self, your perception of the world. And I think it is extremely important to not only take this challenge, but also to bring this, let's say, more holistic, more objective, I would say, perception of morality with you into the world, especially as we live today. Because what we observe today is that, at least in the West, it feels like there's a blindness to the fact that different moralities even exist. And the obvious example are the people who claim what I mentioned earlier about history, right? That it's like, well, you look back at history and these are bad people. And these are your people, even, like your heritage, they were bad. That is a horrible thing to say, and that is a horrible thing to claim. And it is objectively not true. It is not the case. All you're doing is you're taking your current morality and you're looking at the actions of the past. And you're saying that they don't fit with your morality, or they are bad according to your morality, and therefore those people were bad. But that's not the case at all. And quite the contrary, point I will get back to, is that especially when it comes to your heritage, right? You, like, it is crazy to have a morality that claims your heritage is bad, because your heritage is what led to your life. Your heritage is what led to your current ideology, your current morality. Even if you love your morality and ideology, and it is saying that things in the past are bad, you cannot claim that your heritage is bad, because it beat the world, it survived, it won whatever battles it faced, and it led to you being alive here today with arguably a large part of the identity that you do have. So that is just a little pain point. It's like you can look back and say that people are bad or whatever. It's not that's illegal, but you got to be very, very careful with the parts of your own heritage that you do claim to be, especially morally bad. I mean, that is just ridiculous. But maybe even more important than, well, you have to accept that the different moralities existed throughout history, but also different moralities exist across cultures today. And that is something that it seems the West is really not willing to accept. It seems the West kind of naively or arrogantly thinks that they are the best and the most right, but in a kind of toxic way where you claim that you are now objectively good and objectively right, and all the things you deem to be good and the things you deem to be right are no longer subjective, they're purely objective. And therefore, looking at all the humans across the world, everyone should view the morality as we do, because ours is objective. And that is just ridiculous. And it's just, I think for the most part, it's naive, to be honest. I think, naturally you should be arrogant about your own morality. All moralities are, and all moralities will forever be, because it is what binds you to your culture. It's what binds you to the world. And it's such an integral part of your identity. You have to be arrogant, or you have to be confident in your morality. But this like naive objectivity, that what I believe is the reason for why people look at other cultures across the world and say, well, they are just the same, they're humans and their objective morality is the same as ours. And so, if we just show them that ours is objective, then, well, they will get an objective morality. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. That's not the case. Different moralities exist, and they will continue to exist. And they will continue to dominate the worldview of different cultures across the world. And that is something that you can't battle with. That is something that, maybe over, many, 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 many generations, hundreds of years, millennia maybe, you can start to form, some kind of unified morality, but it will not be the one that you have right now. That is for sure. It just won't be the one you have right now, because your morality is inherently deeply tied to your culture, your heritage, the history of your people, the biology of your people, the geographies of your people. That's where the morality comes from. It is just a continuation of your history, right? And so for all people across the globe, because we've been, separated for most of history, that it's the same. The moralities have thousands of years of history for forming, and they are, to a certain degree, biologically part of you at this point. And so just thinking that in one generation with the internet, you can tell everyone, hey, here's objective morality, hey, let's all believe it. That's not how it works. So we end up in this position that if you try to take the super objective view, right, you say, well, there are so many different moralities. They all believe themselves to be right. They have their rules. They have their filters. Do you then claim that all moralities are equal and none is better than any other, right? Because that becomes the natural question. If you claim that, well, my morality is not the best one, because so many others across history and other cultures have different moralities, and they are equally good and bad, right? If that is the claim, then you end up in this situation where no morality is better than any other, and hence any morality is as good as any other. And that is a natural question to ask, but it's very easy to see that this is not true, right? Because, to take an example, if it's part of one person's morality that they can just, kill people freely however they want, and another person does not do that, then, there's something bad about the person who is just killing, right? Especially if it's just random killing right around you, whatever, So then you have to start to ask, okay, why is one better than the other? And the natural thing about the killing is that, well, you want your group to survive, right? You want your culture to survive. I mean, there are fundamental elements to what deems a morality to be good or bad. And an inherent part of that is, does it contribute to your group's survival? Does it contribute to your group's prosperity, into the future? That is naturally what a morality should do, right? It should bring your culture forwards in history. It should make it grow bigger. It should make it stronger. It should make it more prosperous. It should make the lives of people within the group better, according to some, kind of objective metrics, whether that is, health or child, like birth rates or death rates at birth, which used to be high historically, right? I mean, these are objective survival-related metrics, right? That make people's lives easier, make people's lives better, make people survive for longer, and makes a culture stronger, more healthy, right? And so it seems that this, the prosperity of a culture, the survival of a culture, or the group which shares that morality, that is a good thing, right? That is a variable, that is an element of what determines a good morality. And you can even argue that there is no good and bad morality, it's strong and weak morality, right? Now, before continuing, it's important to remember that God and spirituality and, all the maybe non-physical matters of the world, that is something that has to be, interpreted whether individually or culturally outside of this. I don't want to make any arguments against, the real causes, whether they are spiritual in nature or by God or anything other than that. And so what the point being that when I say, it's all just a strong and a weak morality, right? And survival of the group is inherent. Well, you might have claims that your God believes other things to be an inherent good because God determined it, right? Or universal forces that are better or worse, right? And you might deem those to be a fundamental good in your morality. And that is fine, right? That is completely fine. The most important thing, if we're talking more about like the social impact of a morality, right? It's that there's a group with a shared morality, right? And if that group has a shared morality, it is integral that the prosperity of that culture is arguably the number one element, right? Now, with this in mind, right, then you can start to split moralities, because you can say that a morality that leads to the death of a culture is a bad morality, right? Or a morality that leads to, prosperity and strength for a culture, that is a good morality. And you can start to think about other elements that are inherently good when it comes to morality. And, the wording good, bad, strong, weak here, maybe it's easier if I start using strong and weak, because good and bad has a lot of connotations with the present morality that is in your head, right? But we're more talking about what is a strong morality and what you should aim for, right? As a culture, as a society. And so there are other elements like survival of the self, right? I mean, if you, if you have a morality that says you can never hurt or attack anyone, and then someone comes to kill you and you die, well, then you suffered the ultimate loss, right? You are gone. And so your morality was bad, right? It was weak. It didn't allow you to survive as an individual, maybe even before you gave birth to other children. So inherently that is bad, right? So you start tangling with these elements of nature. And then that's what I want to get into here, is that there are these elements of nature that exist no matter what you do, no matter what you tell yourself in the head. People can be violent, right? And violence can solve internal desires, right? If you want territory or whatever, something else, you can use violence to get it. And if people die, they don't challenge you. And so that will just happen, that's part of nature. And so your morality inherently has to deal with these elements of nature, violence being one example, but there are plenty of other elements of nature that do matter, right? So in essence, you have to start untangling the the raw elements inside of humans, right? The innate biological differences and unique elements that do exist no matter what, and they have existed for all of humanity, and they will likely continue to exist for all of humanity. And if your morality does not accept them or doesn't recognize their existence or doesn't conform to them or align with them or try to, make them prosperous in some way, or on the contrary, if your morality instills ideas and values that go counter nature, then what happens is your morality will eventually fail, right? It will lead to some kind of destruction, because nature has its way and nature will have its way, and you can't stop it. And so if you try to impose on yourself a morality that doesn't accept or recognize the realities of nature, then, well, you're bound to, fool yourself into thinking you're doing the right thing, and then eventually nature will come and blow up in your face. Now, there are many elements of nature to consider, right? But, survival of the self, right? That is a key element. You want to survive throughout time, right? So you need to give birth to children, right? You need to give birth to children and raise them on an individual scale, but also on a cultural scale, right? Otherwise, you will die out. And, well, then your morality was useless, wasn't it? It was weak. It lost against nature, against time, whatever other way you want to view that. And then there is like the biological elements of humans and the characteristics of human personalities, archetypes that do exist no matter what you do. If you don't, accept that there are crazy people or psychopaths or whatever else, if you don't accept that these people exist, you don't recognize that people can be like that, then, well, you will be exploited, right, by the people with those characteristics, or those characteristics will flourish, but in a way that is not good for the progression of your society, for your culture. Or inherent meritocracies, right? People are different. Some people are better at other things than others, right? And there are innate hierarchies in the way we organize ourselves. Some people are leaders, some people are followers. Some people are great at physical activity, some people are great at mental activity. We have these innate differences within a group of humans, and they exist, and they're part of nature, and they will always exist. And so if you try to fight those, then you're trying to fight nature, and ultimately that will lead to weakness, because you're not raising the prosperity of your natural behavior, right? You're not bringing out the best of the humans that exist, the raw power of someone who is physically capable or someone who is intellectually capable, right? That power can bring prosperity. It can bring greatness to your society, to your culture. It is what builds, it's what creates, it's what innovates. It is what, raises the bar and raises the level of your society, of your culture, of your group. You need those powers, right? You need the strength of those unique capabilities, of those differences. And if you fight those, if you try to claim that they do not exist or that they are bad or something like this, then ultimately you're trying to press down your whole group. You're trying to press down your whole society, right? To some neutral, meaningless, powerless level that, everyone can be fine. Everyone can be whatever, but ultimately it'll lead to the death of your culture, because you're not going to beat nature. You're not going to bring prosperity. You're going to bring depression. You're going to bring suffering. You're going to probably die out. You're going to lose to the competition, to the other groups in the world. You might even lose to nature because you're so incapable, right? And so you need to bring out this power of nature, bring out these elements, recognize their existence, and then utilize them, maximize them in a way that brings prosperity to your culture. That's what you have to do, right? And so any morality that goes counter to this, it's ultimately a bad morality. It's ultimately a weak morality. And moreover, I would make the claim that it is ultimately a kind of like a neutral bad to push onto people a morality that goes against their inherent self, right? So you can imagine the person at school who is gifted in a certain subject, right? Let's say a gifted math person, right? If that person is being told, no, it's stupid to be good at math, it is horrible, you're nerdy, you're bad, you like math, why do you like math? That's bad. All these things, right? If the culture accepts that, we don't like people who are good at math, then you are being a bad, like your morality is being bad, ultimately bad to that person, right? You're causing that person suffering because they're not allowed to let out their self. They're not allowed to accept the way they function and the natural alignments that they have. They have to tell themselves internally that all the natural desire for math that they have is bad. It's wrong. It is counter to the desire of the culture. All the people around you will deem it to be bad. You have to put that down inside of yourself. You have to be shameful that you're even thinking the thought of wanting to pursue math or enjoying the pursuit of math, right? So ultimately, you're causing suffering to the people whose natural instincts, natural elements you're going against, right? And we see that in a large degree in modern Western morality. That's just the truth of it, We are fighting nature. We are fighting natural elements of all the people around us. We're not letting them out. We're saying they're bad or shameful. People should feel guilty for being good. They should feel guilty for being better than others or prettier than others or whatever other natural inclination someone has, right? All of those things are bad. All of those things are evil, and you need to hide it inside of yourself. And I think it's 100% fair to say that this is objectively bad, objectively evil, because you are objectively pushing suffering upon everyone, right? It's not like you're pushing suffering upon the 0.1% of crazy people. No. You're pushing suffering upon everyone because everyone has these natural elements inside of them in different forms of another, right? Everyone is part of a hierarchy. Some people are greater than everyone else at certain things and across a variety of domains, right? So if you're saying all excellence is bad or all distinguished accomplishments are bad or something along those lines, right? All powerful expressions of any natural instinct of yours are bad, then you're pushing everyone down. You're being evil towards everyone. And that is not a good way to live society, right? That is not a good way to bring prosperity to culture. Quite the contrary, you will do the opposite, as I just tried to describe, right? So ultimately, what you need to do is you need to look at the different moralities that exist. You need to look at your own morality, and you need to say, okay, what is actually good? What is actually bad? What is strong? What is weak? What is the current morality leading to? And I think this is the best way to come to terms with the, let's say, strong filter of your own morality, is to try to say, okay, well, it does make sense that a good morality, a strong morality, a morality worthy of a culture, should bring positive results to that culture, to that society, right? It should bring good things. And okay, if you're in a morality, you always believe that your morality will lead to good things, right? Because whatever you determine to be good is what the morality is chasing, right? But if you start to include objectively good measurements, and it should be pretty easy to include such objective measurements such as survival of your culture, prosperity, you need to grow your population. You need to make people more healthy. You need to make people feel purposeful and joyous and allow people to express themselves. You want to see fire in people's eyes when they wake up and they're ready to fight for their culture. They're ready to bring their soul into existence, right? To share who they are, to give to the world, to build, to create. You want everyone to feel that way, right? That you want that. That is good. And so if you don't feel that, if you don't see that, then something is wrong. A part of the morality is wrong. If you don't bring that prosperity, then you're doing something wrong. And so you have to look at the effects of the morality, right? What is the morality pushing? And you can do that to yourself right now. You can look at what are the effects of the things I claim to be good, of the things I claim to be bad. What is it doing to my group, to my culture, to my society, right? What is it doing? Actually, look around. What are the results? Are the results that people are joyous and purposeful and happy and friends with their neighbors and their community, and they love their culture, and they love their heritage, and they love their family, and they want to have many children, and they want to see a beautiful future forever for their children and their children's children, right? Do people feel that way? Do people have that, essence in them? Do you see that glow? If you don't see that, then something is wrong, right? You're doing something wrong, and you need to figure out what you're doing wrong, and you need to change it. And you need to just take the hard step and change it, right? Accept that you are not perfect, that your morality is not the best of all time and historically and objectively just good, right? That's not true. That's false. That's easily falsifiable. I mean, it's so objectively wrong that you have to be stupid to not see that your morality might not be the ideal morality of existence, right? I mean, that is just a ridiculous claim. And once you accept that, you can start to look into the things you deem to be right and the things you deem to be wrong, look at the results of them and start questioning them. Start saying, well, okay, in my head, this is the right thing to do, but actually doing this thing leads to the suicide of my culture, which is what is happening in the West, right? I mean, birth rates are crazy low, and people are told to be independent and whatever, not get married, not have children. Women are supposed to be independent fighters who don't get along with men, right? All these ridiculous counter-human, counter-life values. And that's going to lead to the death of your culture. That's going to lead to the suicide of your group. That's obviously bad. That's obviously weak, right? That's not right. That's not right in any way or form. And so if that is the result of the things you deem to be good and the things you deem to be bad, then you have to change it. And you have to start on an independent level, right? You have to start with yourself. You have to accept that the things you deem to be good are not necessarily all good, and the things you deem to be bad are not necessarily all bad. There can exist differences, and you have to challenge yourself, and you have to look at the results, and you have to take into account the natural elements of humanity. Because ultimately, if you have a morality that goes counter to human nature, then that is just evil, right? You're causing suffering to people intentionally because of some satisfactory idea that you have in your head, some rationalization that you just came up with based on words and definitions. All your rationalizations for why things are good and bad exist in your head. They're fantasies, creations of the mind, creations of the culture. They've been told to you, they've been pushed onto you, but ultimately they only exist in your mind, and you can change them. And you know they only exist in your mind because if you look at history, they were different, right? People had different things in their mind. Their rationalizations for what is wrong and what is right was different. And you see that across cultures today as well. People have a different perception of what is right and wrong. And those are inherent, those are baked in. And for most people, they will die with the current morality they have. They will not change. They will not change any part of their being, any part of their morality. They're not capable of doing that. But if you are capable, then you better change it. Especially if you're in the West right now. You have to change it. You have to take on a more neutral stance. And you have to change the elements of your morality that are leading to the death of our culture, right? There is no other alternative. If you're capable, then you have to do that. The rest will follow with time. That is just the reality of nature. As with all things, it's the reality of nature, right? There are leaders, there are followers. Some people have to lead the change in moral values. Others will simply follow along. It may take time, it may take generations, but it will happen. And if you look through recent history, even just the 1900s, and you think about how much the morality of the West changed from 1900 to 1935 to 1970 to 2010, it is insane. The differences are insane, and they're within lifetimes, right? Within one lifetime, you might go through three, what we would deem to be now, extremely distinct phases of morality, right? So it does happen. It might be hard in the moment, but it does happen. But it has to be pushed from a larger perspective. And it is integral that it's being done. So, it should be clear now, right? What is the essence of a morality? What moralities exist, right? Look at history. Look at the cultures around the world. And you will see that the different moralities exist. And they all claim that they act in a right way. And the majority of people claim they're good people, right? And they probably are good people within their morality. And you have to accept the existence of it, right? Accept the existence of different moralities. It is a truth. You can see it if you open your eyes, right? It is a truth, okay? Then you have to start to look at your own morality. What is it, right? What do you deem to be good? What do you deem to be bad? In terms of behavior, in terms of actions, in terms of general things you observe across humanity, across society, across culture, right? What is good and what is bad? What do you currently believe to be good and bad? What is your current morality? And that morality will be the morality of your group, right? The people around you in your community, where you were born, your country, and the neighboring countries, it's going to be the same morality, very close to the same morality. And so you have these major groups of moralities, right? And the obvious one is the Christian Western morality, right, of Europe. That is one big group. It is very distinct from the other groups across the world. Even though your morality as a person from Germany or a person from Britain or a person from Italy might be different to each other, the moralities are still very shared and very close to each other because of the common history and the shared ancestry. And so once you start to see that, right, you can start to look at the world and the people and the cultures within it, and you can look at their more different moralities, okay? And you can also look at your own. And then you have to come to the terms with the fact that there are things that are objectively good for the survival of a morality, right? For the prosperity of a morality. There are strong moral elements and there are weak moral elements. And here you can also include your belief in God or your belief in some other spiritual existence, right? Or a spiritual truth of nature. That's completely fine, right? Whatever is deemed to be a base part of nature in your worldview can be considered, right? And that can be considered as part of the, let's say, more objective measurements of what determines a strong or a weak morality. Now, it's important to keep yourself objective in this viewpoint, right? Because there are base elements of nature, human nature, that exist. And those are physical truths of nature that you will not change, and they do exist. And don't get yourself fooled with what you believe to exist and what actually exists, right? Don't use your own morality, your present morality, to trick yourself into thinking that, for example, like all humans are equal or something like this, right? Like that's obviously not a truth of nature. It's obviously not nature, how nature behaves, right? Biologically, physically. And so it's important to distinguish between the real raw elements of nature and humanity and the differences that exist within them, because ultimately, not all people are the same. People have different weights of different characteristics, right? People have different biologies, different capabilities, but all of those are elements of nature. And then you have, social elements of nature that grow out of the fact that we are social beings, like hierarchies, right? Of all kinds, right? Hierarchies in all different domains. And so they exist as part of nature. And then you can, to the degree that you are spiritual or believe in some God or some powers, those you might also deem to be base elements of nature that exist, right? And that's fine. And you just have to, keep in mind the things which are base elements of nature according to God, according to the spiritual world of existence, versus, again, what has been layered on top as part of a religious morality, right? So here you also have to seek the essence of the God or the spirit or the nature that you believe in. And then couple those together, right? Your understanding of your current morality and the base elements of nature. And then you can start to judge your own morality, right? You can start to look at, does the beliefs I have about what is good, what is bad, what is wrong, what is right, does it align with nature? Does it recognize the existence of nature as it is? Does it build power around natural elements for individuals, for people who are part of your group, right? Does it bring that power out into the world? Does it allow individuals to flourish through their natural elements? And also with that, allow your culture to flourish through its natural elements, both on an individual scale and on a social scale, right? Are those elements of nature flourishing, right? There are elements that you might want to dampen, right? You might want to dampen the violence, and that is understandable, right? But you might want to bring out the hierarchy or the physical capabilities of individuals, or the intellectual capabilities of individuals, right? Or maybe you want to bring out the disagreeableness, or you want to dampen it, right? It's not that there are infinite combinations you can build on top of those raw elements, but it's integral to understand that if your morality goes against those raw elements of nature, then you are inherently causing suffering to the people who are subject to that nature, right? If you try to dampen intellectual existence, you're causing suffering to intellectually excellent people. If you're trying to dampen physical excellence or beauty, you're causing suffering to the people of physical excellence capabilities and the people who are objectively beautiful, right? You're causing suffering through those actions. So don't fool yourself into thinking you're doing something good if that good action is inherently dampening the raw spirit and the soul of individuals or of a lot of people in your culture, right? And with that in mind, right, as a final conclusion, once you have that understanding, you can start to change, right? You can start to shift your beliefs. See that they are not necessarily the ultimate good or the ultimate bad or the ultimate right or the ultimate wrong, right? You can start to see those elements and think, actually, this belief in good doesn't lead to prosperity for my culture. It doesn't lead to greatness. It doesn't lead to survival. I should change it, right? That's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to bring your morality on track with greatness and prosperity. That is the right thing to do. No matter if you believe in God or not, it is. And so you should do that. And it's your duty to do that, your responsibility. If you want to lead a great life moving forward, and if you want to contribute in a great way to your group, to your culture, to your society, right? That is what you have to do. And with that, I think we will end it. Thank you for listening. Hopefully morality is clear. Take charge, right? Take control. Shift yourself in the right direction, especially for Western people. Shift your morality in place again, right? Bring it back to a place and a state that leads to prosperity, that leads to greatness, that leads to flourishing for your society, for your culture, for your people. Be grateful for your heritage, right? And all the people that brought you to the state. Be grateful for the greatness and the good things and the honor and all the blessings that you have, right? And bring more of them, right? Make your morality bring more of them into the future for yourself, for your kids, for your culture, right? That is your responsibility.